They told you silver is $71. That number is a screen number. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, the same 1,000-ounce bar is trading like it's $130. Dubai is matching it. Singapore can't touch supply under $115. So the event is simple and brutal. The paper price says one thing, the physical world is screaming another, and the gap is getting bigger, not smaller. I'm your host, and this is our channel. Let's move. Because when identical metal carries two prices at the same time, that isn't volatility. That's a pricing system losing oxygen. And once a system starts gasping, it doesn't recover quietly. It snaps. Now watch this. In a normal market, a gap like this dies fast. If bread is $3 in one city and $6 in another, traders load trucks, run the spread, and the gap collapses. That's arbitrage. That's how honest markets police themselves. But silver isn't behaving like an honest market anymore. The truck isn't showing up. The spread isn't closing. It's widening. So we have to ask the uncomfortable question. What happens when a market can't arbitrage because the cheap supply is mostly imaginary? Here's the first takeaway we need to lock in. Fact: the paper market is quoting a price. Interpretation: the physical market is quoting scarcity. Those are not the same product. A futures contract is a promise. A bar in your hand is a fact. And right now, facts are trading at a premium. Now here's the second takeaway, and it's the one most people missed because it landed like a quiet policy memo, not a headline. On January 1st, 2026, China flipped a switch. Not a slow phase-in, not a "we're considering" draft, an immediate licensing system that turned a massive chunk of refined silver flow into restricted material. Only a limited group of exporters can ship it out. Quotas, paperwork, approvals, delays. If you've ever dealt with a government licensing gate, you know what that means in practice. It means yes on paper and no in time. So think about what just happened. A huge portion of refined supply became sticky, not destroyed, but trapped behind a funnel. And when you trap supply, you don't just reduce volume, you weaponize time. Factories don't run on time. Solar lines don't run on maybe next month. Electronics don't ship on pending approval. They need metal on schedule. So when the schedule breaks, buyers don't negotiate. They pay up. That's why Tokyo is paying up. And that brings us to the third takeaway. Commodities don't break when price goes high. They break when delivery becomes uncertain, when people stop trusting the promise, when they start demanding the thing. So let's talk about the place where the promise lives. The big Western paper hubs, the exchange screens, the vault reports, the comforting numbers that make everyone feel like supply is fine. Because if the vault report is real, the premium shouldn't exist. The premium is the smoke. And smoke means something is burning. According to the latest exchange data, registered inventory, the metal tagged as available for delivery, fell hard to around 128 million ounces. Read that again. Not eligible, not somewhere in a building. Registered, deliverable. And then December delivery demand came in like a wrecking ball, roughly 65 million ounces. That's not a little pull. That's half the shelf in 1 month. So here's the contradiction that should make us sit up. Supply is shrinking. Delivery demand is surging. But the screen price barely reacts. In a real market, that's impossible. In a paper market, it's Tuesday. And here's the mistake most people make. They look at the price and assume the price is truth. But in stressed commodities, price can lag reality until the moment it can't. Price is the last to admit it. Delivery is the first. So ask yourself this. If you can buy a claim at $71 and sell the actual metal for $130, why wouldn't you try? And if enough people try, what breaks first? Now we step into the part that gets spicy, because this isn't just market mechanics. This is power. This is positioning. This is who saw the storm first and who's still checking the weather app. Let's talk about the banks. Not the way people talk about banks, emotion, conspiracy, vibes. We do this like adults. We separate fact from inference. Fact. Big banks don't pivot huge books for entertainment. Interpretation. When they pivot, they're protecting themselves from something they can measure. Now, multiple market sources and positioning analysis suggest a major U.S. bank did something wild in 2025. They reportedly reduced and closed a very large paper short position over the summer into the fall. That's not taking profit. That's leaving the battlefield. And at the same time, insiders estimate they built a physical stack measured in the hundreds of millions of ounces. Not a paper stack. Physical. Bars. Allocated. Heavy. Now pause. Why would you stop betting against silver and start hoarding silver if you believe the paper price was stable? You wouldn't. You only do that if you think the paper price is a costume, and you want the real thing before the costume rips. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. A reported lease deal put a large block of metal into a Chinese bank's hands with a return window in early January 2026, right when export rules tightened, right when registered inventory got thin, right when physical premiums started screaming. That timing is either genius or a trap. Because if that metal has to come back when the West is starving for deliverable bars, the return isn't a casual favor. It's a stress test. And stress tests reveal what's real. We've already seen what happens when someone yanks on the physical chain. In London, an enormous purchase request reportedly hit the system in October 2025, on the order of 1,000 tons, tens of millions of ounces. A big order, yes, but not in the market big, if the published vault numbers are fully accessible. And yet, lease rates didn't just rise, they detonated. From fractions of a percent to triple digits in hours. That is not normal. That is not seasonal. That is the sound of a vault report colliding with a delivery request. And then a major refiner reportedly halted silver operations until January because sourcing got ugly. Think about that. A refiner stops work not because demand vanished, but because raw metal became hard to secure, in a market that claims massive inventory. If that doesn't ring alarm bells, nothing will. So why didn't the screen price explode? Because paper markets can dampen panic, until panic wants delivery. Paper can delay truth. Paper can't replace metal. Now we get to the move that tells you the exchange officials see the same tension, the margin hike. Right between holidays, when liquidity is thin and attention is low, margins on silver futures went up. That's the exchange pulling the brake. It's not a moral statement, it's a survival move. In past squeezes, margin hikes were used to cool frenzy after price went vertical. But this time, the price wasn't vertical. So what were they cooling? Not price, risk, delivery risk. The risk that too many people stand up and say, I want the bar. Because if too many people ask for the bar, the leverage becomes visible. And the leverage is the monster under the bed. Let's do the math like we're supposed to. Open interest sits around 150,000 contracts. Each contract is 5,000 ounces. That's 750 million ounces of paper claims, against around 128 million ounces registered. So the system is running on the assumption that most people won't ask. It's fractional delivery. It works until it doesn't. Now here's the part that makes our stomach drop. In stressed periods, delivery demand can climb toward 20% of open interest. Not everyone, just enough. 20% of 150,000 is 30,000 contracts. Times 5,000 ounces is 150 million ounces. Do you see it? That's more ounces than registered inventory. Meaning, at elevated stress, the system can face a delivery mismatch. And when a system faces a mismatch, it reaches for one tool: cash settlement. Now, don't get dramatic. This is not a guarantee. This is a risk. Possible. But it's the obvious pressure valve. And here's the punchline. Cash settlement changes the meaning of the contract. If you bought a silver contract and you get dollars instead, you didn't own silver. You owned exposure. And exposure is not protection in a supply crisis. So let's bring it back to you. If you're an industrial buyer and you need metal to keep a line running, would you accept cash? No. Cash doesn't solder a circuit. Cash doesn't print solar paste. Cash doesn't coat contacts. You need atoms. So industrial buyers will pay premiums, they will sign long contracts, and they will fight for deliverable sources. That's why the physical market is ahead. It's not emotional, it's operational. And here's a detail we can't ignore. Silver is not a nice-to-have metal anymore. It's a wiring metal, a contact metal, a paste metal, a medical metal. It's in the guts of the modern grid. So when people say, they'll just substitute, we need to be precise. Fact, some applications can thrift a little. Interpretation, the big demand drivers don't swap it out fast, because reliability is the product. A solar manufacturer can't gamble on a cheaper paste if it ruins panels in 5 years. A chip maker can't risk higher resistance if it kills yields. That's why physical buyers don't wait for a better deal. They secure supply like you secure oxygen. Now, remember that two-price world we started with? It creates a new kind of anxiety. If you're sitting on physical metal, you don't ask, what's the price? You ask, who will pay the premium? And can they get delivery? If you're sitting on paper, you don't ask, what's the chart? You ask, will the rules change before I can convert this claim into atoms? This is why the gap is psychologically dangerous. It forces every participant to reveal what they really own. So we watch one number like hawks, the pace of withdrawals versus the pace of replenishment. If registered drops and doesn't refill, that's not a dip, that's a drain. And drains don't reverse without price. Also, keep an eye on where price discovery wants to migrate. If Western paper stays detached while Asia pays up, the center of gravity shifts, because the buyer with the highest urgency sets the marginal price. So here's the open loop. Will the real price start printing in Tokyo first, and only later leak back to the screen we all grew up watching? And when that happens, headlines won't lead. Shipping manifests will. We'll know the shift is real when bars stop moving west and premiums refuse to die for weeks. Now, question for the comments. If your brokerage screen says $71, but the real-world bar clears at $130, which price would you trust and why? Drop it below, because the answers tell us how awake the crowd is. Here's our fourth takeaway. We don't need 10 angles. We need the few that matter. 1. Supply got gated. 2. Deliverable inventory got thin. 3. Physical premiums went insane. 4. Paper price stayed calm. That combination doesn't last. It resolves. And the resolution is usually violent. Now we talk about the deficits. Global demand has been outpacing supply, year after year. That's not a meme. That's drain. A deficit is not temporary tightness. A deficit is consumption eating the buffer. The buffer is what keeps premiums small and delivery smooth. When the buffer shrinks, every new shock hits harder. China tightening export flow is not a shock on an empty beach. It's a shock on a cracked dam. So the question becomes timing. When does the dam fail? And what does fail look like? It might look like a sudden repricing on the screen. It might look like exchanges changing rules. It might look like premiums staying high while futures get hammered. It might look like available turning into call for quote. Different forms, same truth. Scarcity wins. Now watch this next clue. There's a calendar catalyst people are sleeping on. January 15th, 2026. Index rebalancing. Passive commodity funds adjust weights. That can create mechanical selling or buying in futures. And mechanical flows don't care about your logic. They push buttons. So imagine the most toxic combo. Physical tight, premiums high, and a wave of paper selling hits the screen because an index says so. What happens? The screen price dips, premiums widen, arbitrage gets even juicier. More people stand up and demand delivery. Registered inventory drains faster. The pressure spikes. That is how a disconnect becomes a rupture. Not because everyone panics, because the system's plumbing gets overwhelmed. Now, we keep our credibility here. This is educational. We manage risk. We're not gambling. We're measuring. And the measurement is screaming that the official price is not the full story. So what do we do with that? We don't marry predictions. We watch the tells. We watch registered inventory. We watch lease rates. We watch delivery demand. We watch physical premiums. And we watch what the big holders do with metal. Do they lease it out or do they pull it back? Because that's the difference between confident and worried. Here's the psychological warfare piece. If this thing starts moving, you will see whipsaws. Up days that feel unreal. Down days that feel like a trap door. That's the point. Volatility is how weak hands are harvested. But volatility doesn't change physics. If supply is gated and demand is real, the direction of stress is one way, toward higher real prices or restricted access. So if you see a scary dip on the screen while premiums stay elevated, don't let the screen hypnotize you. The screen is the narrative. The bar is the reality. Second question for the comments. If exchanges offer cash equivalent during a shortage, do you consider that a default or just how the game works? I want your honest take. Now, we need one more layer because the most dangerous part is not price, it's trust. Once participants believe a contract can't deliver, behavior changes. People front run, they demand early, they hoard, they stop leasing, they stop providing liquidity. And that's when even small imbalances spiral. A market can survive high prices. A market can't survive broken confidence. So here's the cliffhanger. We're heading into the next delivery windows with a market that already showed stress in December. We're heading into rebalancing flows that can distort paper pricing. We're heading into a world where a major supply gate just tightened on January 1st. And we're watching big institutions treat physical metal like it's strategic, not speculative. So ask yourself, when the next big delivery demand hits, does the screen finally catch up? Or does the exchange change the rules to protect itself? Because whichever happens, it tells us something permanent about where price discovery is going. If you want the next piece as soon as it hits, before the crowd catches up, subscribe now. Short, simple, do it. Because the next move won't wait for anyone to feel ready. And if the dam cracks on a thin liquidity night, the first people to understand it won't be the ones watching headlines. It'll be us, watching the inventory lines. Now keep your eyes on the next print. Because the moment the physical market forces the paper market to blink, that's when the real price of silver stops being a number and starts being a battle.